spiritual food for thought. In my last video, I talked a little bit about how I think that God's plan for passing on the faith and making a godly family really varies from what modern Christianity promotes and some of the differences there. Now, I did mention some of the hurdles that exist, so in this one I'm going to talk a little bit about the generational warfare that we face as believers. So I want you to consider for a second, and by generational I mean with each generation that comes. Okay? So we're talking about maybe decades here. Consider for yourself once when you were 19 and compare that to what you understood when you were 9. Do you see how just a decade allows you to gain a whole bunch more insight and understanding, okay? Now take it to 29. Compare that to when you were 19 or when you were 9. Now you can take it up to, 59. If you're there already, you have an easier job. The rest of us will pretend and think. But the thing is that as time progresses, you learn more and more. Because we don't know everything, we have to learn as we go. We can learn from experience and we can learn from situations. Now, one thing that we must consider as we evaluate this is that Satan, the devil, Lucifer, has been around for a very long time. Personally, I'm going to guess somewhere around 6,000 years, okay? Give or take. So if you think about what he understands now compared to what he understands when he first fell and was kicked out of heaven, consider that for a moment. He understands a lot of things about the working of this earth, and right now he roams, he roams to and fro upon this earth, seeking whom he may devour. Consider that. Now also, one thing that I think that modern people in general, which then also includes modern Christianity, the Christians of today, that they lack is a generational vision. A lot of people are so hand to mouth, they're so paycheck to paycheck, they're so today or this week only, that they're not thinking about their children or their children's children. They're not thinking about things like securing, a piece of property or securing a business or securing things that can help for generations to come. I believe that the opposition, and when I say the opposition, I mean Satan and the demons, have a very clear understanding of a few things. They know their time is short, but their time is not over. Therefore, they can introduce something in this generation that the next generation will wake up in the midst of and consider to be normal. Even though it may be common, it's not normal, it's not God's way, but they'll just accept it as is. And then they can insert a little something in that generation that the next generation will be raised in the midst of, and they'll just take it as status quo. This is the way that it is. That is a huge problem. What we really need is a restoration of God's ways, but if we just kind of go with the flow of society, the status quo, wake up in the midst of it, and we just think everything's the way it should be, we're going to run into some huge problems. For me, as a 30-some-year-old, man, as a believer who's been a believer for, just over a decade now, and as I consider, I can't wake up in the midst of a war that has been raging for millennia and think that there aren't any booby traps, that there hasn't been anything set up ahead of time that may be a big pitfall for me these days. Consider that. So what I see and what I believe is, as I shared from Deuteronomy, when God talks about children, they rise up, when you lie down, when you walk by the way, when you sit in your house, you should teach your children his ways. It presupposes a family that's together. And depending on what country, depending on what society, depending on what time period, that has ebbed and flowed as far as how together a family could be. If you think back to the pioneers of the early Americas, okay, what you have is people, heading out to settle somewhere, and they're together as a family. Until the one-room schoolhouse came along, they taught their own children. Okay, if the dad did something, often he did something from his home that was, a job. If you needed something blacksmith, you'd head over to the blacksmith's house where he had, next to his house, a garage where he would work on his, work on his trade. And then his children would be able to watch his trade. So a few things that I believe kind of happened, and I'm kind of making these very general. I'm not, saying this is exactly, it applies to everything. But I want you to consider for a moment the effect that the Industrial Revolution in that generation had on the man's presence with his family. A lot of people left their land, they moved to the cities, and dad left, 5 or 6 days a week often to make a living. And he would leave his family home alone. The public school system at some point came along and was inserted in that generation and took the children out of the home. the women's right movement came along and took the women out of the home. Now again, these are just kind of general. But if you consider that, if every single one of those things would have been tried to be instituted at the same time, where we get rid of mom, we get rid of dad, and we get rid of the children out of the house at the same time, nobody would have fell for it. They would have realized it was a trap. But because the opposition still has time on their side, and because they can do what I call generational warfare and insert something in this generation that will greatly affect the next, but the next will wake up in the midst of it and not really realize how things used to be, then we're going to find stuff like this going on. So I think that it would have never passed, it would have never happened, nobody would have went for it if it happened all at once. But all of a sudden we just wake up and, well, yeah, dad's supposed to leave his family for work. Well, yeah, the kids are supposed to go to school. Well, yeah, mom is supposed to have a job too. Once we combine debt bondage with it, people really become tight and hard pressed. And of course they almost have to because they chose to go into debt. So that's what we find ourselves in the midst of, people. I chose to personally do something with my family, like avoiding debt. We chose to do something with our family that would be, we'll live off of one income. We chose to do something in our family like we'll be faithful stewards of the education and the teaching and training of our children. They were entrusted to us, not the state. We have a responsibility to raise them up to know and understand and be able to function in this world. We take that very seriously. And we also chose that, we would just try to do things in our life and structure it in such a way that when we rise up, when we lie down, when we walk by the way, when we sit in the house, we could be together as a family. There's a scripture I came across once that says, "For this cause was the Son of Man manifested, to undo the works of the evil one." Paraphrasing that from memory at the moment. But the point is, when that hit me, okay, a lot of my life is what I considered hypothetical, because I evaluate the world that I live in through what God says, and I believe that what He says is true and accurate. Therefore, if I obey Him, I'm hoping that the results work out because it's contrary to everything I've ever been taught. Hence, a hypothetical existence. So I have these theories about things based on what God reveals, and we said, okay, well, we'll just do these things. We're going to go with Him on His way. And when I came across that verse in the midst of trying to figure out a bunch of this stuff, trying to reorganize our life in a way that we would be free to obey Him in these ways, that verse came along. When I compared the works of the evil one with the generational warfare, then taking the man out of the house, in my opinion, was part of the works of the evil one. That was the devil's idea. We went along with it, and our ancestors did, but it was the devil's idea. Taking the children out of the house, that's something that I believe was the devil's idea. It wasn't God's plan, but we went along with it. Taking the women out of the house. Okay, again, I believe this is part of the devil's plan. Now, I'm not saying a woman's place is in the home. I'm saying so is my place. That there is easy ways to do things to provide for my family from my land. Okay, that presupposes me having a place to exist, like owning property, but we can do that. We can choose to do that. And ultimately, I just believe that God is right, and if He declares something to be true, and this is His proper plan for people, and they can choose to live their life His way if they see fit, then by faith, we can walk that out, leave the results up to Him, and so far, He hasn't failed us yet. We've failed Him many times in my walk, and in my wife's walk, and in the walk of this family, okay? But He's forgiven us, and He has not failed us yet. So, as you contemplate what I shared last time, about how the Christian faith kind of just gets periodically inserted in the children's life throughout the week, and then when they grow up and they're on their own, it gets inserted a little less and a little less till He doesn't show up at all because they never seek His face. And you contrast that with when you rise up, when you lie down, when you walk by the way, when you sit in your house, teach children my ways, and all day, every day, there is a focus on the one who created us and His Redeemer that He sent. And when the children wake up as they grow, then they consider Him. When they lie down, they consider Him. They're saturated with His word, which doesn't return void. Their minds are being renewed, okay? And once that's coupled with the faith that brings the Spirit, then it's a whole nother level. And that's something they can carry with them throughout their life, that it's just part of existence is Him. My life doesn't stray from Him. Sure, in distractions and sin and things like that, it can. But the point is that He made us, and He is a focus of this life. So if we've got to combat generational warfare, don't worry, for this cause was the Son of Man manifested, to undo the works of the evil one. We have an advocate. We have a redeemer. We have one who fights our battles for us. And if we will only walk by faith and leave the results up to him, he can prove himself to be faithful. So I just wanted to kind of share that idea and give you some food for thought. Think about these things. What has been inserted in these generations that's going to be normal for the next ones? Especially if you look at everything that's going on in society right now. Consider this. For us who've been here a while, a lot of this stuff seems really strange and really bizarre, but our children are growing up in the midst of it. And their children will be exposed to far more. And these things that are in a lot of ways insane, in a lot of ways just completely defiant and spit in the face of God, are going to be very, very common and commonly accepted as the norm as we move forward. So hopefully this is some good spiritual food for thought for you guys. Be blessed. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.